Reluctantly, he uncorked the crusted bottle and filled a glass. Was he come to this? He sighed and sipped, quaffed and sighed. The spell of the old stored sunshine seemed not to work this time. He could not cease from plucking at the net of ignominies in which his soul lay enmeshed. Would that he had died yesterday, escaping how much? Not for an instant did he flinch from the mere fact of dying today, since he was not immortal as he had supposed. It were as well he should die now as 50 years hence. Better, indeed, to die untimely, as men called it, was the timeliest of all deaths for one who had carved his youth to greatness. What perfection could he, Dorset, achieve beyond what was already his? Future years could but stale, if not actually mar, that perfection. Yes, it was lucky to perish, leaving much to the imagination of posterity. Dear posterity was of a sentimental, not a realistic habit. She always imagined the dead young hero prancing gloriously up to the psalmist's limit, a young hero still. And it was the sense of her vast loss that kept his memory green. Byron! He would be all forgotten today if he had lived to be a florid old gentleman with iron gray whiskers, writing very long, very able letters to the Times about the repeal of the Corn Laws. Yes, Byron would have been that. It was indicated in him. He would have been an old gentleman exacerbated by Queen Victoria's invincible prejudice against him, her brusque refusal to entertain Lord John Russell's timid nomination of him for a post in the government. Shelley would have been a poet to the last. But how dull, how very dull would have been the poetry of his middle age. A great unreadable mass interposed between him and us. Did Byron, mused the Duke, know what was to be at Missolonghi? Did he know that he was to die in service of the Greeks whom he despised? Byron might not have minded that, but what if the Greeks had told him in so many words that they despised him? How would he have felt then? Would he have been content with his potations of barley water? The Duke replenished his glass, hoping the spell might work yet. Perhaps had Byron not been a dandy, but had he not been in his soul a dandy, there would have been no Byron worth mentioning. And it was because he guarded not his dandyism against this and that irrelevant passion, sexual or political, that he cut so annoyingly incomplete a figure. He was absurd in his politics, vulgar in his loves. Only in himself, at the times when he stood haughtily aloof, was he impressive. Nature, fashioning him, had fashioned also a pedestal for him to stand and brood on, to pose and sing on. Off that pedestal he was lost. Quote, "The idol has come sliding down from its pedestal," end of quote. The Duke remembered these words, spoken yesterday by Zuleika. Yes, at the moment when he slid down, he too was lost. For him, master dandy, the common arena was no place. What had he to do with love? He was an utter fool at it. Byron had at least had some fun out of it. What fun had he? Last night he had forgotten to kiss Zuleika when he held her by the wrists. Today it had been as much as he could do to let poor little Katie kiss his hand. Better be vulgar with Byron than a noodle with Dorset. He bitterly reflected. Still, noodledom was nearer than vulgarity to dandyism. It was a less flagrant lapse, and he had over Byron this further advantage. His noodledom was not a matter of common knowledge, whereas Byron's vulgarity had ever needed to be in the glare of the footlights of Europe. The world would say of him that he laid down his life for a woman. Deplorable somersault? But nothing evident save this, and his whole life was faulty. The one other thing that might be carped at, the partisan speech he made in the Lords, had exquisitely justified itself by its result. For it was as a knight of the Garter that he had set the perfect seal on his dandyism. He, yes, reflected it was on the day when first he donned the most grandiose of all costumes, and wore it grandlier than ever yet in history had it been worn, than ever would it be worn hereafter, flaunting the robes with a grace unparalleled and inimitable, and lending, as it were, to the very insignia a glory beyond their own, that he once and for all fulfilled himself, doer of that which he had been sent into the world to do. And there floated into his mind a desire, vague at first, soon definite, imperious, irresistible, to see himself once more, before he died, endued in the fullness of his glory and his might. Nothing hindered. There was yet a whole hour before he need start for the river, his eyes dilated somewhat, as might those of a child about to dress up for a charade. And already in his impatience he had undone his necktie. One after another he unlocked and threw open the black tin boxes, snatching out greedily their great good splendors of crimson and white and royal blue and gold. You wonder he was not appalled by the task of essaying unaided a toilet so extensive and so intricate. You wondered even when you heard that he was wont at Oxford to make without help his toilet of every day. Well, the true dandy is always capable of such high independence. He is craftsman as well as artist. And though any unaided knight, but he with whom we are here concerned, would belike have doddered hopeless in that labyrinth of hooks and buckles which underlies the visible glory of a knight's, quote, arrayed full and proper, end of quote, Dorset threaded his way featly and without pause. He had mastered his first excitement. In its swiftness was no haste. His procedure had the ease and inevitability of a natural phenomenon, and was most like the coming of a rainbow. Crimson doubleted, blue ribbonded, white trunk hosed, he stooped to understrap his left knee with that strap of velvet round which sparkles the proud gay motto of the order. He affixed to his breast the octoradiant star, so much larger and more lustrous than any actual star in heaven. Round his neck he slung that long dædal chain wherefrom St. George, slaying the dragon, dangles. He bowed his shoulders to assume that vast mantle of blue velvet, so voluminous, so enveloping, that despite the cross of St. George blazoning on it, and the shoulder knots like two great white tropical flowers planted on it, we seem to know from it in what manner of mantle Elijah prophesied. Across his breast, he knotted this mantle's two cords of gleaming bullion, one tassel a due trifle higher than its fellow. All these things being done, he moved away from the mirror and drew on a pair of white kid gloves. Both of these being buttoned, he plucked up certain folds of his mantle into the hollow of his left arm, and with his right hand gave to his left hand that ostrich-plumed and heron-plumed hat of black velvet in which a knight of the garter is entitled to take his walks abroad. Then, with head erect and measured tread, he returned to the mirror. You are thinking, I know, of Mr. Sargent's famous portrait of him. Forget it. Tankerton Hall is open to the public on Wednesdays. Go there, and in the dining hall stand to study well Sir Thomas Lawrence's portrait of the 11th Duke. Imagine a man some 20 years younger than he whom you there behold, but having some such features and some such bearing, and clad in just such robes. Sublimate the dignity of that bearing and of those features, and you will then have seen the 14th Duke somewhat as he stood, reflected in the mirror of his room. Resist your impulse to pass on to the painting which hangs next, but to Lawrence's. It deserves, I know, all that you said about it when at the very time of the events in this chronicle it was hanging in Burlington House. Marvelous, I grant you, are those passes of the swirling brush by which the velvet of the mantle is rendered. Passes so light and seemingly so fortuitous, yet seen at the right distance, so absolute in their power to create an illusion of the actual velvet. Sheen of white satin and silk, glint of gold, glitter of diamonds, never were such things caught by surer hand, obedient to more voracious eye. I'm going to reread that sentence. Sheen of white satin and silk, glint of gold, glitter of diamonds, never were such things caught by surer hand, obedient to more voracious eye. Yes, all the splendid surface of everything is there, yet you must not look. The soul is not there. An expensive, very new costume is there, but no evocation of the high antique things it stands for, whereas by the Duke it was just these things that were evoked to make an aura around him, a warm symbolic glow sharpening the outlines of his own particular magnificence, reflecting him the mirror reflected in due subordination the history of England. There's nothing of that on Mr. Sargent's canvas. Obtruded instead is the astounding slickness of Mr. Sargent's technique. Not the sitter, but the painter is master here. Nay, though I hate to say it, there is in the portrayal of the Duke's attitude and expression a hint of something like mockery. Unintentional, I'm sure, but to a sensitive eye discernible. But it is clumsy of me to be reminding you of the very picture I would have you forget. God, how long stood the Duke gazing, immobile. One thing alone ruffled his deep inward calm. This was the thought that he must presently put off from him all his splendor and be his normal self. The shadow passed from his brow. He would go forth as he was. He would be true to the motto he wore and true to himself. A dandy he had lived. In the full pomp and radiance of his dandyism he would die. His soul rose from calm to triumph. A smile lit his face and he held his head higher than ever. He had brought nothing into this world and could take nothing out of it. Well, what he loved best he could carry with him to the very end, and in death they would not be divided. Wow, damn. It's a hell of a run this guy's on. The smile was still on his face as he passed out from his room. Down the stairs he passed, and oh! Every stair creaked faintly. I ought to have been marble. Jesus Christ, this guy is fucking, this is a fucking unbelievable piece of writing. Oh, shit. And it did indeed seem that Mrs. Batch and Katie, who had hurried out into the hall, were turned to some kind of stone at sight of the descending apparition. A moment ago, Mrs. Batch had been hoping she might yet at the last speak motherly words. Hopeless mute now. A moment ago, Katie's eyelids had been red with much weeping. Even from them, the color suddenly ebbed now. Dead white her face was between the black pearl and the pink. Quote, and this is the man of whom I dared once for an instant hope that he loved me. End of quote. It was thus that the Duke quite correctly interpreted her gaze. I believe it just doesn't end. To her and to her mother he gave an inclusive bow as he swept slowly by. Stone was the matron and Stone the maid. Stone, too, the emperors over the way, and the more poignantly thereby was the Duke a sight to anguish them, being the very incarnation of what themselves had erst been or tried to be. But in this bitterness, they did not forget their sorrow at his doom. They were in a mood to forgive him the one fault they had ever found in him, his indifference to their Katie. And now, oh, Miriam, even this one fault was wiped out. For stung by memory of a jibe lately cast at him by himself, the Duke had paused and impulsively looking back into the hall had beckoned Katie to him. And she had come, she knew not how, to him. And there, standing on the doorstep, whose whiteness was the symbol of her love, he, very lightly it is true, and on the utmost confines of the brow, but quite perceptibly, had kissed her. And now, he had passed under the little arch between the 8th and the 9th emperor, rounded the Sheldonian, and been lost to sight of Katie, whom, as he was equally glad and sorry he had kissed her, he was able to dismiss from his mind. Yeah, this motherfucker doesn't stop. In the quadrangle of the old schools, he glanced round at the familiar labels, blue and gold, over the iron-studded doors: Schola Theologiae et Antiquae Philosophiae, Museum Arundelianum, Schola Musicae, and Bibliotheca Bodleiana. He paused there to feel for the last time the vague thrill he had always felt at sight of the small and devious portal that had lured to itself and would always lure so many scholars from the ends of the earth, scholars famous and scholars obscure, scholars polyglot and of the most diverse bents. But none of them not stirred in heart somewhat on the found threshold of the treasure house. Quote, how deep, how perfect the effect made here by refusal to make any effect whatsoever, end of quote, thought the Duke. Perhaps, after all, but no. One could lay down no general rule. He flung his mantle a little wider from his breast and proceeded into Radcliffe Square. Another farewell look he gave to the old vast horse chestnut that is called Bishop Heber's tree. Jesus. Certainly no, there was no general rule, with its towering and bulging masses of verdure tricked out all over in their annual finery of catkins. Bishop Heber's tree stood for the very type of ingenuous ostentation. And who should dare cavil? Who not be gladdened? Yet awful, more than gladdening, was the effect that the tree made today. Strangely pale was the verdure against the black sky, and the multitudinous catkins had a look almost ghostly. The Duke remembered the legend that every one of these fair white spires of blossom is the spirit of some dead man who, having loved Oxford much and well, is suffered thus to revisit her for a brief while, year by year, and it pleased him to doubt not that on one of the topmost branches next spring his own spirit would be. Oh, look, cried a young lady, emerging with her brother and her aunt through the gate of brazen nose. For heaven's sake, Jessie, try to behave yourself, hissed her brother. Aunt Mabel, for heaven's sake, don't stare. He compelled the pair to walk on with him. Jessie, if you look round over your shoulder, no, it is not the Vice-Chancellor, it's Dorset of Judas, the Duke of Dorset. Why on earth shouldn't he? No, it isn't odd in the least. No, I'm not losing my temper. Only don't call me your dear boy. No, we will not walk slowly so as to let him pass us. Jessie, if you look round. Poor fellow. However fond an undergraduate be of his womenfolk at Oxford, they'd keep him in a painful state of tension. At any moment they may somehow disgrace him, and if throughout the long day he shall have had the added strain of guarding them from the knowledge that he is about to commit suicide, a certain measure of irritability must be condoned. Poor Jessie and Aunt Mabel. They were destined to remember that Harold had been very peculiar all day. They had arrived in the morning, happy and eager despite the menace of the sky, and, well, they were destined to reproach themselves for having felt that Harold was, quote, really rather impossible, end of quote. Oh, if he had only confided in them, they could have reasoned with him, saved him. Surely they could have saved him. When he told them that the first division of the races was always very dull, and that they had much better let him go to it alone. When he told them that it was always very rowdy and that ladies were not supposed to be there. Oh, why had they not guessed and clung to him and kept him away from the river? Well, here they were, walking on Harold's either side, blind to fate and only longing to look back at the gorgeous personage behind them. Aunt Mabel had inwardly calculated that the velvet of the mantle alone could not have cost less than 4 guineas a yard. One good look back and she would be able to calculate how many yards there were. She followed the example of Lot's wife, and Jessie followed hers. Very well, said Harold. That settles it. I go alone. And he was gone like an arrow across the high, down Oriel Street. The two women stood staring ruefully at each other. Pardon me, said the Duke. With a sweep of his plumed hat, I observe you are stranded. And if I read your thoughts aright, you are impugning the courtesy of that young runagate. Neither of you, I am very sure, is as one of those ladies who in imperial Rome took a saucy pleasure in the spectacle of death. Neither of you can have been warned by your escort that you were on the way to see him die, of his own accord, in the company with many hundreds of other lads, myself included. Therefore, regard his flight from you as an act not of unkindness, but of tardy compunction. The hint you have had from him, let me turn into a counsel. Go back, both of you, to the place whence you came. Thank you so much, said Aunt Mabel, with what she took to be great presence of mind. Most kind of you. We'll do just what you tell us. Come, Jessie, dear. And she hurried her niece away with her. Something in her manner of fixing him with her eye had made the Duke suspect what was in her mind. Well, she would find out her mistake soon enough. Poor woman, he desired, however, that her mistake should be made by no one else. He would give no more warnings. Tragic it was for him in Merton Street. To see among the crowd converging to the meadows so many women, young and old, all imprescient, troubled by nothing but the thunder that was in the air, that was on the brows of their escorts. He knew not whether it was for their escorts or for them that he felt the greater pity. And an added load for his heart was the sense of his partial responsibility for what impended. But his lips were sealed now. Why should he not enjoy the effect he was creating?